Kingdom greetings and God's richest blessings be multiplied to you and yours, beloved family. You're tuned into another segment of Filling Our Lands Live Interactive Worldwide broadcast exclusively here on the Boston Praise Radio and TV Network. I am your host, Pastor Hobbs. I'll be with you through till 6 p.m. We have the privilege of broadcasting Tuesday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Sunday evening, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And so we encourage you to go to our main webpage again, www.bostonpraiseradio.tv. There you'll be able to see us, hear us, and engage in the instant chat. And that platform, we are also simulcasting on 39 social media platforms. We're on Pastor Bruce Wall's Facebook page. We're on Global Ministries Christian Church Facebook page. We're on Boston Black News Facebook page. And we will be on YouTube as well as on Twitter. All connected to Boston Praise Radio and TV Network and our senior pastor and founder, Pastor Bruce Wall. So we encourage you, please go to that platform. We're trying to usher people to come to our main platform, www.bostonpraiseradio.tv. While we appreciate you joining us on my personal Facebook page, on Pastor Bruce Wall's Facebook page, and on many other social media platforms, ultimately our goal is for you to become fluent and connected to our main platform that will simulcast all those other platforms most clearly and most effectively. When we have to broadcast via my personal Facebook page, there's some feedback that you'll hear. So it's not optimal. You'll only be able to get myself and not our guest. So to be able to get all of our guests, get the best audio, the best visual, and the best interaction, that happens via www.bostonpraiseradio.tv. We are expecting Senator Eldridge. He may be running a little bit late, but I did speak with his staff, Immaculate, on this morning and confirmed that he was anticipating to be with us on this afternoon from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. So prayerfully he is traveling, and we pray for traveling mercies for him. It's a lot of traffic. Myself and Brother Eric just got here not long ago on public transportation, and it was rather slow. So he may be caught up in traffic, and we pray that's the case and that he will in fact be able to be with us on this afternoon. He is a senator who is doing some extraordinary work, and we thank God for his leadership on the state house level as a senator who has proposed legislation. There's several pieces that he'll talk about them more intelligently, but I just got a phone call from a returning citizen that did not have to pay for that call. So we know that the legislation of free phone calls for those who are incarcerated has been passed and is being implemented. So thank you for those who were the advocates to help us to pass that piece of legislation. I want to acknowledge Danielle Williams from Prophetic Resistance, and she from Prophetic Resistance, she's doing an outstanding work. I so appreciate her leadership with regard to collaboration and coalition. That's what we have to move toward. Many of us have become fluent in the game that a lot of funders do, that have us pitted against each other, fighting each other for crumbs, rather than coming together with our respective level of expertise in a coordinated way that is fair and that actually empowers all of the organizations to do what they're independently, uniquely poised to do, but in a collective way that we support each other and making sure that we're all successful. The back end stuff, the pieces of legislation, the reports that need to happen, all that stuff that we're able to not just get grants, but to keep good records and to be able to manage those grants, as fledgling organizations and grassroots organizations may struggle with accounting or paperwork, though have incredible outcomes and impact with very little resources. So again, I want to acknowledge Danielle Williams from Prophetic Resistance and her leadership for the reentry summits, the reentry resource fairs, and collaboration. We're working with her to do some more collaborative kinds of things with Stacy Borden from New Beginnings, as well as with our brother Armand Coleman with Transformational Prison Project. I have their shirt on today, got a lot of compliments on it, that it says on the back, hurt people, heal people, heal people. And that's from the Transformational Prison Project that he was introduced to as he was incarcerated, with his aspiration to be the baddest thug or criminal that they could be, having no fear, been in solitary confinement for long periods of time. And that was his aspiration until he met a loved one of someone whose child life was taken from them, and to hear that survivor of the victim of a person whom he perpetrated this act of taking their life. And that was the awakening call. That was the Damascus Road experience for Armand Coleman and many other people who those words of "I forgive you" broke him and helped him to be able to understand the impact of what he actually did. Not from an impact statement that said, "I hope you burn in Gehenna," but from someone who said, "I forgive you," and the power of forgiveness. And so as a result of that changed him. That was a transformation as he began to now participate in what they call restorative justice practices, where you sit in a circle with the perpetrators, with the victims, and you talk to each other, you hear each other out, and you build authentic relationship that you're able to collectively do restorative justice work. As we heal, we can help others to heal. Amen. And so I so appreciate people like my sister Stacy Borden, who's done that transformative work, trauma informed, and now is helping the women that she has the New Beginnings house for, that's housed 10 women, that people who she actually served time with, who helped her while she was incarcerated to change her direction, helped her to do the work. And now she's come out and created the only women's reentry program run by a returned citizen that's directly trauma informed healing. And so I thank God for our sister Stacy Borden and New Beginnings and what God's doing in and through her life, for Armand Coleman and Transformational Prison Project, and for Daniel Williams from Prophetic Resistance, as well as other organizations, Ed Gaskins, who was very instrumental in being able to help fund some of these projects, and certainly our legislators, whom are doing what they can to be able to help us to create policies and programs and resources to be able to effectively minister to our returning citizens, whom we are able to minister to while they're behind the wall, and to create legislation to support them while they're behind the wall. And when they come out from behind the wall, that we've got systems in place to receive them and to help them to reacclimate back into society, being productive, thriving citizens, not just them, but even their families. And so we're so grateful for the work that we have the privilege to co-labor in doing this restorative justice work. And so we're going to shift gears because our guest is here in the person of Senator Eldridge. Thank you so much for being with us, sir. How are you, sir?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me. I just came straight from the State House, so sorry for being a few minutes late.
No worries. Understand. Appreciate you doing the work. Of course, someone is trying to reach me. Let's see who that is. Yeah, I'll have to let that go, but I apologize for the interruption on the phone. We'll let that go to voicemail, but totally understand, Senator. Again, we appreciate you taking time. We know you're really busy, and so we thank you for the time coming to be with us here. We're just coming from City Hall, dropping off absentee ballot applications, as well as mail-in ballot applications, and continuing to work with our folks from the City Hall Department to try to institutionalize a mechanism in place for those who are already eligible to vote to be able to exercise the right that they already have. You know as well as I know, and our listening audience, hopefully they're becoming educated and educating others, that in Massachusetts, if you are waiting pre-trial, if you're serving a misdemeanor, you can vote while you are incarcerated.
That's right. And we passed some reforms last year in the election reform law to make sure it was clear that those that are in pre-trial, often county jails, that they're able to vote, and that the sheriffs are educating the incarcerated men and women that they do have that right to vote, to your point.
And so can you expound upon that, because that's the Votes Act that has been passed, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So talk a little bit about that legislation. I know you were you one of the signers, one of the endorsers on that, or what was your role with regard to that piece of legislation drafting and passing?
Yeah, well, last session, so every session it can change what committees legislators are on, but last session I served as the Senate Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Election Laws. So I was advocating for things like same-day election registration, making early voting, permanent, as well as some incarcerated related or prison related voting, we also would have liked to repeal, the constitutional amendment, that took away the vote for people in prison on a felony. But that's a longer process, so that hasn't passed yet, though the committee this session has reported out. But last session, it did not get reported out. So anyhow, part of the Votes Act was making it clear in state law that those that were in a prison pretrial, usually a county jail, that they, therefore still had that right to vote because they were not convicted of a felony. And probably most importantly, that there was education happening by sheriffs, by civic and election reform groups to those communities, so those individuals could vote. Often, whom because of bail or other reasons are being held in a jail or prison for a long time.
So help me to understand. So with that piece of legislation, now that it has been passed, and that's wonderful, and I know I'm part of Democracy Behind Bars Coalition, that was really instrumental with the leadership of the African American Coalition Committee.
Oh, yes.
Guys at MCI Norfolk who are really centering the work that we all do.
Incredible. Yep.
Yeah.
I just visited there about a month ago.
You did?
To meet with the men. Yep.
Outstanding. Well, I'm so pleased that I just received today in the mail my approval to be on the community advisory board with the African American Coalition Committee. So actually initially it was denied, unfortunately, but we submitted an appeal, and by the grace of God, that appeal was favorably responded to. So today that happened, and it happened literally. I got the mail today, but it was dated on August 31st, which happened to be my birthday. So that was my birthday gift.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I'm so pleased that was one of the things that Alameen, who's one of the leaders of the African American Coalition Committee, had said that was his biggest priority, was for that to happen, as that afforded me the opportunity to be able to better advocate going in and out, as we went in with Dr. Ojutuku, who is the first black woman to head up the Boston Public Health Commission. And we were endeavoring to meet with a full body of 200 members, but unfortunately we were limited to meeting with just the executive board. However, that was productive because myself and State Representative Chris Worrell, and myself, as well as Tom Ash, one of the staff who works at DOC, together we were able to facilitate Dr. Ojutuku and Philip Reason, her person who does a lot of dismantling systemic.
Oh yeah, Philip's great. Yep,
you know him.
Guy. Yep.
Yeah. So it was my first meeting, but we had some pushback, quite candidly. Unfortunately, that happens oftentimes just when you're talking about the DOC. But we pushed through it. We got through it. We were able to meet with the executive committee and talk about some of their challenges addressing health. They were interested in addressing diabetes, mental health, as well as addiction. And, the mental health that post-COVID had them further isolated. And so for so many people, our mental health has been challenged with COVID. And in those settings, even more so. And unfortunately, some of the reprieve for that, people who are in long-standing recovery relapsed, and some actually transitioned. So, so she was able to bring some slides in that we have yet for them to get to them, but God willing, again, that will actually happen. These slides that are addressing all their concerns, but more importantly, how do we proactively help those who are incarcerated to manage and address their health proactively and to get this information ongoing. So that's something that we're working on. And now that I've been accepted as a advisory board member, working with Representative Russell Holmes, who goes in frequently.
Oh yes, he does. Yep.
Got long-standing trust with them that we'll be able to complement that to really create these systems that they can again be proactive rather than reactive as it relates to their holistic health.
That's fantastic. And I will say the healthcare conditions, especially on mental health, are just atrocious in the DOC. We've put a real big focus on that. A lot of criticism on WellPath, the private provider. That contract is going to come up again in about a year. So we're hoping that perhaps a new provider that provides better care and truly treats the incarcerated men and women with respect and dignity will be placed.
Outstanding. Thank you, Senator. So important. I mean, people really, first of all, we know many people are incarcerated that we found are wrongfully convicted. They've been there for long periods of time. The system's not necessarily just, and we know people oftentimes are there who are exonerated. So that's one. Then people who actually did whatever they did, but it should be about correction, not perpetual punishment.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. And that's the other thing we toured. My district includes MCI Shirley and Susan Baranowski prisons in the towns of Shirley and Lancaster. So we toured there, and these are among the newer prisons. These were built in the 90s. But there's, no modern trades. They still got, the barber shop, which is fine, but, it's not really going to create a lot of jobs for people. The education's very limited. There's a lot of barriers towards college education for incarcerated men and women. So very, very frustrating. So we really got to get the DOC into the 21st century, solar installation, coding, even some aspects of modern agriculture. There's some real opportunities for well-paying jobs once people are released, as well as the college education, which, there's a growing group of colleges that are providing instruction, but they face a lot of barriers to actually getting into the prisons and directly instructing the men and women. So a lot of barriers there.
Well, again, I appreciate leadership that understands, one, humanizing people, regardless, they're humans, right? And to be treated humanely, and even people who are coming to visit them to be treated humanely.
Yes.
And Andy Peck, the undersecretary, and I know I have a brother-in-law, interesting enough, you may know him, Dennis Everett, who is the director of restorative justice.
Fantastic. Yep.
And to see where this brother's come from being incarcerated now to being the head of restorative justice under the Department of Corrections, and people like Andy Peck who have his ear, who actually, Andy Peck has his ear, and said, like, as a person who's directly justice impacted,
exactly,
to be able to humanize these systems. And so I'm grateful that there's change, and it doesn't happen as quickly as many of us would like for it to happen. But I believe that I know for sure, because many people who were convicted felons were not ever able to go back into institutions or to be employed by the DOC in a capacity like this.
Right.
So that's change.
Yeah, the Credible Messenger program that Undersecretary Peck created.
Yes.
To have formerly incarcerated people going into the prison, say 6 months before someone is released, and say, these are all the preparations I can help you with, before you get released. So that's been great. It's embarrassing to say, because it took over 10 years, but I worked for the past 10 years with the DOC to make sure that every incarcerated person upon release gets a state ID.
Yes.
So that would have been a barrier. So finally, the RMV and DOC signed a contract last November.
What? Yep. Oh wow, that's great. So what? So now what happens?
Yeah. So what happens now is that the RMV will go directly to every prison. Or sometimes, just given the number of people released, they might go to another facility, and then everyone who's released, say that week, will get processed and get a state ID. And the reason I came to this is that I have a 97-year-old constituent who works on homelessness issues in Boston. She's from my district, but she started a nonprofit, and she was discovered, this is 10 years ago, that sadly, many of the homeless men and women in Boston shelters were formerly incarcerated, and they had no IDs.
That's right.
Yep. And so now we have this, hopefully, system that's working now with a contract where the RMV and the DOC provides that ID upon release, and not, relying on the person to go to the RMV and face all the barriers that he or she might face.
That's outstanding. And I'm curious, because interesting enough, Healing Our Land has been working with the Office of Returning Citizens. Bob Turner, who has been there since its inception. Kevin Sibley was there, who's no longer now. Dave Mayo is there. And so through these iterations of the appointed executive director, the staff being Bob Turner, who is a returned citizen and in long-term recovery, which quite candidly is the model that came from D.C. of the Office of Returning Citizens, is for it to be run by a returned
Exactly.
citizen
Yep.
who has the empathy, the anointing, the expertise to really know how to most effectively work with this population. So what we've been working with Bob Turner doing piecemeal to be able to get people their IDs upon. So when they come out, a $25 sponsor from our audience would be able to give us a money order that we would then have Eric Kennedy, who's a returned citizen, who would pick the person up, because you oftentimes have to go to help them to gather maybe their social security, their birth certificate, or go to a computer to be able to find where those things are, to generate where those things are. They could be any place across the country. And so them being able to help them get those documents that they need, even to be able to go to the registry to get a mass ID. So we did that piecemeal. And so I know that State Representative Brandy Fluker Oakley.
Yes, Father Bill. That's right.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that's the bill that actually has been passed that you're talking about that is facilitating that, or is there another piece of legislation?
Yeah, it gets a little complicated because Representative Fluker Oakley filed that bill, and proud to be a supporter of it. It hasn't passed because it came to be a decision that it could be done through an executive order.
Okay.
So that's what it was done. It was done by basically the DOC and RMV signing a contract.
Great.
Which Rep. Fluker Oakley and I were at to celebrate last November, that this is a contract that the RMV and DOC are supposed to work together. In the budget that Governor Healy just signed, I had secured a $150,000 earmark to buy the equipment, to buy the machines, to take the pictures of incarcerated people and therefore get their IDs.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Now, will that also be at the jail and the House of Correction, or is that only in the prison? Okay.
That's the next project.
Okay. We're making progress. So we're still doing the piecemeal for the House of Correction and for the jail, but now it's at least it's institutionalized for folks coming out of prison will get a mass ID automatically.
Right. Every state prison, and I will say on the county front, and in my district is Middlesex County, so I have a different sheriff. Is Sheriff Katusian has taken some action to make sure that people get IDs. So I know Sheriff Tompkins does a terrific job here in Suffolk County. So really call upon every sheriff as they should make this system work as well, and sign a contract with the RMV to make sure that the men and women that are in their facilities are getting IDs as well.
So what you're telling me, if I hear you clearly, Sheriff Katusian has already facilitated that executive order that you're talking about that happened on the state level, on the county level, with under his jurisdiction.
He hasn't specifically signed the same executive order, but he has a partnership where the correction officers make sure that people, say, a month or two before they get released, get an ID. I would say it's not perfect, but Sheriff Katusian has, to his credit, has worked on that. So
we'll have to reach out to him because again, I'm a part of something called Democracy Behind Bars Coalition, and we are trying to find out what sheriffs are doing across the Commonwealth that we can learn from each other to really empower returning citizens. So, and I know Sheriff Tompkins has been really progressive.
Yes,
in contrast to many other sheriffs, affording us even access pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and post-pandemic as it relates to building that infrastructure for those to exercise their right to vote, for bringing in candidates who are running for office. What a difference a DA makes. We're bringing in other candidates now who are running for D3 where that sits, as well as Mass and Cass. So the candidates, we brought all 7 of them in to go through the units that we had access to so they could directly engage the returning citizens to make an informed decision, as well as know you have the right. We're now working diligently in the implementation side of the legislation you just talked about, the Votes Act.
Sure.
So now that it's been passed and now we're hoping to implement, and again, Sheriff Tompkins, we've been working with him as well as former State Representative Nika El Ugardo.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Who helped us craft legislation with Sheriff Tompkins that unfortunately didn't pass, but because the Voting Rights Act passed, it didn't need to pass, hopefully, because that was a pilot that we were hopeful to be able to, and we're still hopeful to do. And the vision is that Sheriff Tompkins would communicate everyone under his custody and care who's eligible to vote
electronically
to the elections department.
Okay.
Just as you and I get to our home, many opportunities for mail-in ballot, to drop them. So people who are under their custody and care, who are specially qualified, and they can participate via absentee ballot, don't necessarily have to register to vote. So that's an implication that they don't have to do. So the challenge becomes who's eligible, and as it stands, quite candidly, they don't have the technology we find via the Director of Social Services and the people who are taking us from unit to unit to tease out who's serving a misdemeanor and who's serving a felony. Though I'm told by Sheriff Tompkins that they can do it on their computer. It hasn't dwindled down to the staff when we come in. Nonetheless, so that their computer can do that, then it should be able to communicate that list to the elections department. They then turn around and create absentee ballot applications addressed to each returning citizen. And it be in a locked mobile ballot box that will go from unit to unit, just as their home is their incarcerated cell, and it will be picked up on election day at 8 p.m. like every other place has an opportunity to cast their ballot and give them agency. Right now, the way that it happens in its progress is that we bring in the absentee ballot applications, we bring in the registration forms, we bring in the candidates, we bring in the platforms and talk civic education about the various elections and the term limits and the roles that they serve. So we do this education ongoing, and then we hand carry those applications to the elections department. They then in turn send the ballot to them. Hopefully, we check and see if they do, and if we don't, find out what happened, why, and then their ballot has to go to a correctional officer or a caseworker and be handed in the drop box in the lobby that they now have, that they never had before. A drop box in the lobby of the National County Jail and the Suffolk County House of Correction. Progress. But it's still not the agency that needs to happen. We just came from Chicago, Eric and myself, in Cook County. They're casting ballots behind the wall.
Wow.
It's actually a polling site. It's much larger facility, but nonetheless, it's happening in Washington, D.C. It's happening in Cook County. And so we now want to implement it here in Boston as a pilot. And hopefully that's something that we can be able to then encourage other sheriffs throughout the Commonwealth to implement this level of infrastructure, so that's institutionalized, so they almost have to opt out of the exercising their right for to participate in democracy. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, that is fantastic, and you said the word hope, and I think that's the thing, is that incarcerated people really need signs of hope. Signs of hope both behind the walls and then obviously outside as returning citizens. I had a meeting today with the campaign to end life without parole.
Excellent.
With a couple of returning citizens. Just talking about, we had a sort of historic Judiciary Committee hearing where we had incarcerated men and women be able to testify through Zoom into the committee hearings.
Nice.
So committee members got to hear from incarcerated men and women.
Yes.
And when you don't have the option of getting before a parole board, you're going to lose all hope. You're more likely to not be a productive member. Behind the walls inside a prison, and you're not likely to do the programming and be a positive person. In the prison. So that's a big effort, and that's where we're really not providing a lot of hope in our state prisons, whether it's programming, whether it's the life without parole sentence, or whether it's just the quality of health care in the prison. So we've really got to change that and treat people with dignity and respect.
Outstanding. Well, so God willing, this mobile ballot box initiative will be something that will become a reality. And so that's our hope. Again, just coming back from Chicago, what we learned is we needed to actually connect with a legal person. And so we're going to connect with Sophia from the Lawyers for Civil Rights. We met with her counterpart there in Chicago that actually serves in that role and facilitated being the legal voice for the advocates for implementation. And so we're hopeful to forge that kind of partnership with the ACLU. I'm sorry, I keep getting those entities, not the ACLU, but the
Lawyers for Civil Rights.
Thank you, Lawyers for Civil Rights.
I get them confused too.
So hopefully that will actually happen. But I'm going to go back to, so that's the Votes Act, and we're talking about implementation with that. With that said, you mentioned felony reenfranchisement, and so that's something that we're pushing for. We just came from, again, Chicago. The goal is that every place across the country would understand that all men or mankind or humanity are given these unalienable rights, right?
Absolutely.
For the pursuit of happiness. So that is your fundamental right, is to exercise your right to vote. Your freedom's been taken from you. That's your punishment. Now you should be in a posture of correction. Again, with that should be programming, rehabilitation, and the ability to be able to determine who's going to be your sheriff, who's going to be your DA, who's going to be people who are going to control your destiny, and for prevention, that things that would have stopped you from going in, you have family that's still on the outside, and things that are going to affect them, and put things in place that when you come out, that you've got you've got legislators who will have programming and policies and funding in place for you to actually re-enter back into society and set you up for success.
Absolutely. And I will say, one of the disturbing realities I realized when I first got elected is that, representing, again, a district that included Susan Baranowski and MCI Shirley, is the men at those facilities are counted towards my district. They're counted as my constituents, but obviously have no vote.
Yes.
And so that means that the rest of my constituents had, the vote, but the people that I would go in to see at MCA Shirley or Sousa did not, and that's extremely disturbing.
Absolutely. Isn't that what you call taxation without representation?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. I would say incarceration without representation.
Right. Well, that goes even to the 13th Amendment, because you're right, because the 13th Amendment says slavery was abolished with the exception of those who've been convicted of a crime. So for all intent and purpose of the 13th Amendment that is still intact today, says that everyone incarcerated is a slave.
Yeah, exactly. The exception being that, if you are being punished for a crime, somehow certain rights can be taken away from you.
Correct. So I'm hopeful that some law student or someone will take that, to not even amend, but to abolish that 13th Amendment that says slavery was abolished with the exception of anybody. So that's the new Jim Crow, the modern day slavery. That's the loophole, and hence this tough on crime. When we just came back from Chicago, it was civic power was the theme, and challenging 50 years of mass incarceration. And we can see what's happening on mass and Cass, right? That is this opioid epidemic largely fueling that has to do with trauma, compound trauma. And so treatment is the thing that people need, not incarceration. But certainly what should not be happening is what's happening: open air drug, injection drugs, shooting each other, selling drugs, open air drug sales, human trafficking, and just deplorable conditions that any human being should have to be subjected to, much less the broader community also have to be subjected to it. So I'm hopeful that now that it's taken a tipping point and it going to a state of emergency, that it won't just be the usual sweeping it away and not really addressing the laser individual programming that needs to happen for each individual for them to ultimately be able to recover and to be sober and to recover. And if a person actively is not ready to be sober, because that is the case for some people. I personally am a proponent of it's my phone here. I am a proponent of thanks, brother. I personally am a proponent of a multi-pronged strategy. And so harm reduction, I think, there were times that they had active injection drug sites.
That's being discussed at the state level.
Really?
To legalize that. Which I support.
Yeah. I mean, people are going to do that. They're going to do that. So why not give them clean settings where they have a bathroom, where they have people you can build a relationship with, and though they're coming in, they're giving clean needles, so you're not infecting each other because you just want to hurry up and get a fix that have a place to have clean needles, and you're able to build a relationship and find out what's really going on with you beyond this, that you can maybe love up on people, treat them humanely, that over a period of time that they're wanting to stop.
Exactly. And I think it would also help decrease the concentration at Mass and Cass. I think one of the things that so important, and again, I'm a state legislator from Metro West, is that you have people from across the state, really from Eastern Mass, who have addictions often going to mass and cast,
Yes.
but it's all of our problem.
Yes.
I think the state should be doing a lot more as well, including
Yes.
DPH.
Yes, and this notion of I know the Long Island Bridge they had. I know that they did some great work over there, and for that to be and then for other places that need to, as you said, need to share that burden.
Yeah.
And we can't wait 5 years to build a bridge, and there's some political challenges with, I guess, Quincy wanting the bridge even to be rebuilt. So short-term strategy and long-term strategy. I'm hopeful that and that I'm happy to hear that that's one of the prongs of the strategy that's being considered. Though there are people who are opposed to it, and I get it. I hear that some people feel like it has to be this way or this has to be this way. And I do think we need options for that are multi-pronged so that you can meet people where they're at.
Exactly.
And try to move them to a place that's better.
Absolutely. And on the disenfranchisement front, I just want to also give a shout out to David Baxter with the No Longer 3/5 Coalition.
Yes.
So he's been having forums, across the state, including we had one in Worcester. So he's been a very powerful voice to repeal the constitutional amendment that sadly was approved by the voters in the 2000 actually.
2000, yes.
Yep.
I appreciate you mentioning him. He sat right in that seat, and we did an interview with him. He's a good friend and a good brother, and he's helping to educate me and our audience with the strategy that No Longer 3/5 is doing. That was also created at MCI Norfolk.
Oh yeah.
And now so there one brother, in fact, who we supported him writing letters, his campaign for him to be released. Oh man, if I can't recall his name.
From Norfolk, or yeah, okay. I apologize. I don't know.
No, it'll come to me. But in any event, the point is, this is one of the co-founders of No Longer 3/5 who's still behind the wall.
Okay,
and and David's been released.
Right.
So I think it's amazing how many of these organizations are founded behind the wall, doing extraordinary work, and then one will be released, and their goal is to continue to advocate for those who are behind the wall. So he called in on the broadcast while he was able to be here physically. His voice was able to be here, which is always the most powerful thing to me. When I met you at the Reentry Summit and had the opportunity to be able to play the voice of Alameen, who was speaking on behalf of the African American Coalition Committee, as well as brother Valentino Fosi with Joint Venture, and that whole concept about people that are serving life for joint ventures that they were not necessarily even, but just the notion of a joint venture, and this whole piece of legislation that I understand is also pending that would undo that, because too many people are serving life for things that they just were associated with. That
they were in the car or something like that, but they weren't participating in the crime.
So I appreciate you shouting out David Baxter and No Longer 3/5, and help me to understand, because again, I'm still getting clarity. So the piece of legislation that the African American Coalition Committee drafted in collaboration with State Representative Russell Holmes, that I understand is the second piece of legislation in the country to move it this far to a constitutional convention on that agenda, where it's passed the House and the Senate and the election committee, and now that's progress. Now it sits there, and now the goal is for it to be pulled from that constitutional convention agenda to the floor, and ultimately everybody, I guess, it has so many votes for it to pass to ultimately become law. And is that the end, or does it also need that referendum?
It does. So what's happened this session is the Joint Committee on Election Laws has reported the bill out favorably.
Okay.
But now the House and Senate have a constitutional convention. It has to be approved in 2 consecutive sessions, so this session and next session, so in 2 years.
Oh wow!
By a majority of the legislature, so 100 plus 1 votes, because there's 200 legislators. And then it goes to the ballot to be voted on by the voters.
Wow.
Yep.
So what David is doing, and No Longer 3/5, and going across the Commonwealth, because I believe it has to be broken up geographically. It can't just be, and you got to get so many signatures in so many different places that it's diverse and covers all those areas. But now is that a referendum? Is that a ballot?
Citizens petition?
Okay, so educate that.
So that's basically the same process, except that it's a lower threshold for the legislature, so then only 25% of the legislature would have to pass that to go to the ballot. So I think that's the strategy, because unfortunately, I don't have a majority of my colleagues who support repealing the disenfranchisement law, but there's definitely 25% of legislators. So that's the idea. The challenge is, how do you raise the money to pass that at the ballot? Because voters, sadly, will fall into the trap of, well, if you've committed a crime, therefore you shouldn't be voting. And that's what we have to educate voters on is, no, this should be, it is, but it should be a human right, and you shouldn't have your right to vote taken away just because you're serving time in prison.
So
that's the challenge.
That's the challenge, is the education that has to happen and the resources to be able to do that. But it's interesting because David helped me to understand, as you said. I mean, I was all excited. And this is what happens. Oftentimes we get pieces of legislation with the second in the country, move it this far,
right,
and we're doing victory laps. But the truth of the matter is, it's a long way, and so. That can't be a single prong strategy to be able to do this. So I appreciate that David's doing this simultaneously while this is happening, with not a lot of confidence that this is going to actually go that route all the way to the end.
Exactly. And I think the thing that's so important that, and I talk to my constituents about, is that Massachusetts really sadly, led the sort of war on drugs and mass incarceration in the 90s, so it before, Congress passed anything, it was happening here. You have the Willie Horton impact, the 88 presidential election. So that led to a lot of tough on crime laws passing here. Yeah. And I try to make the point that, Massachusetts isn't, as liberal as we think it is, and that a lot of the laws that happened in the 90s, we still have to reverse or repeal. And that's the work that's needed, at the grassroots level.
Wow. So with that said, I understand on September the 20th, their joint venture and some other folks are going to be having a major rally from 12 to 2. I believe you're one of the speakers on that program?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
I will be as well. So I'm looking forward to that and encouraging people to come out to the State House 12 to 2 for this really important rally. And so talk a little bit more about that specific rally, and I guess the various pieces of legislation that either you've authored or you're in support of that will help empower our returning citizens.
Yeah, so one of the balancing acts I have is I'm the Senate Chair of the Judiciary Committee, so therefore I don't co-sponsor most bills. Okay. But I also am the Senate Chair of the Criminal Justice Reform Caucus, where we prioritize bills. So it's kind of a balancing act, but the caucus has prioritized the joint venture law, repealing life without parole, and a lot of the bills to increase programming in the DOC, as well as, and I met with some advocates today, is the treatment and no incarceration bill, which is a bill that would say that if you have a substance abuse problem and you relapse, a judge shouldn't be sending you to jail. He should be sending you to a treatment center to get recovery. Yes. And prison is no place for someone that has a disease, has an addiction issue. But unfortunately, right now, judges can do that if someone has a relapse while they're under a condition or before probation. So that's another one of the bills that we prioritized. Yeah.
Wow. Yep. So talk a little bit more about the joint venture, because again, I've gotten some education from Valentino Fosi, but I don't understand all the implications specifically relative to the piece of legislation that is pending.
Yeah. So the joint venture law would basically severely limit the ability for a prosecutor to just say, because someone was, in the car or was, in a house or had, perhaps a minor role in a crime, that shouldn't automatically allow the prosecutor to charge that other person with first-degree murder or other crime that, puts that person in prison for 30 or 40 years or even life. And I tell you, going into the prisons, whether Norfolk or Susan Baranowski, MCI Concord, there's so many men that made a bad decision, or maybe they were with the wrong crowd at age 17, 18, 19, but they didn't actually, commit a crime, but they're in prison for 30, 40 years, if not longer, So it's really got to be reformed. Again, if someone was actively participating in a crime, a robbery, a murder, other terrible felonies, they should be held accountable, but not just because they happen to be in that car or house. So that's what the bill does.
I think we've got a caller.
Oh, sure.
Caller, you are live on the air. Go right ahead. Can you hear us?
Two questions.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Hi.
Okay, I have two questions for you. One regarding the ID law that just passed. Does that include those who haven't already had a driver's license or an ID in Mass?
Yes. In other words, if you went into prison without a ID, then the DOC will get you a state ID. It won't be a driver's license, but it'll be a state ID. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And my second question is, there's this initiative going around about prisoner organ donor. Have you heard about that?
I have, yes. I know that legislation was filed. I do not support it, and I strongly believe that it will not pass, that it really has a lot of opposition to the bill, so I do not think that bill will pass.
Rightly so. And, so thank you. Those are my two questions. I'll continue to listen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me go to the piece about the organ donor, because I got many calls from people who were outraged and said, "Did you see this?" And I hadn't seen it, and of course I was outraged. I do need to say that I did reach out to State Representative Russell Holmes, who was one of the signers on that, and to get clarity. And he expressed to me that the origin of that was someone who was a member of his church who was talking about being able to, who asked for that to be able, asked specifically with regard to if you're a person who's incarcerated, being able to have your organ donated to a family member, not just a random person, but
right.
to a family member. That and he added on that the bonus of, if a person's going to do that, then for them to also be able to get some good time. And so when he explained that to me, it made a lot more sense. To your point, it's not going to pass.
I think it was well intentioned, the goal. I think it was trying to encourage people to donate their organs, but to tie that with good time, to decrease your time in prison, is not sound policy, and it sounds pretty cruel. So
and with a population that's so vulnerable, and many instances not, in order to get out quickly might make, and it's just for it to be random for just some person. And then, and quite candidly, the truth of the matter is, I hate to be a conspiracy theory, but the truth of the matter is, once organs are something that you can't just go to the store, right? And so and so the black market, if you will, I mean, people literally will come up. I used to be an organ donor, and actually I decided not to be, for the reasons why many black people, you see these kind of crazy accidents that might happen. You have to wonder sometimes, like, they know my organ, they need this organ. Could this be some freak thing? Like, so, I mean, people who've been in the military whose organs aren't even there, their bodies shipped back. So again, so that notion of your organs being something that are a rare thing, and that you could, maybe something happened to be able to get those organs that are not righteous, potentially could be the case. So so with this particular population, giving an incentive for you to be able to be organ donor or blood, those kind of things is just it was so I appreciate having the conversation with him and so forth, and other people that, like you said, well intended, but could easily be not well received or implemented.
Right, exactly. You just don't want to put any person in that position to say you have to give up something in your body in order to reduce, your confinement. Not good policy.
Right. So, okay, so let's go back to this September 20th. And so the other pieces of legislation, so you talked about the joint venture, and you talked about is it life without parole? Is
ending life without parole. So instead it would be, there's a couple different bills, but one of the bills would say that if you're convicted of first degree murder, you would serve 25 years and then you would be eligible for parole, whereas right now those individuals are never eligible for parole. Wow. So, and I believe that's was filed by Senator Liz Miranda, representing parts of Boston, and Representative Chris Worrell.
Outstanding. Beautiful. Well, with literally 6 minutes left of our time, I really want to thank you for coming in and being in. Hopefully this will just be the first and not the last time. You're welcome here on Boston Praise Radio and TV Network, as well as Healing Our Land broadcast. And so anything else that you wanted to speak to our listening and viewing audience and update them with pieces of legislation or things they might need to know to support you and us to be able to move things forward to empower our returning citizens.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, and thanks for asking that in particular, is that the Healy-Driscoll administration just announced a $15 million community reinvestment grant, and it gets into a bill filed by Representative Mary Keefe and former State Senator Sonia Chang Diaz of justice reinvestment. And the model is as we're closing prisons, and we did close Walpole Prison just this year, as we're closing prisons, as we're reducing mass incarceration, the number of people in prison, that money shouldn't just be, quote unquote, saved as taxpayer dollars, but it should be invested in communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs and mass incarceration. Sadly, usually majority minority communities of color, working class or poor communities. So this is a version of justice reinvestment, and so if you go to my website, it announces the grant that any community group that's having an impact on transformational prison project or restorative justice or other groups that are having a direct impact on formerly incarcerated people can apply for this grant.
Wow.
For reentry. I'm hoping for programs behind the wall. And we really want to make sure that, every organization, and quite honestly, groups led by formerly incarcerated people, often disproportionately people of color, are aware of these grant programs and apply for the money. So the deadline is September 15th. It's a $15 million project. And just want to, your listeners to know is that the point I'm making to the DOC commissioner and really the governor is, if we're going to close more prisons, and we're trying to close the women's prison at MCA Framingham now, take that savings and you got to put it back into the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by institutional racism, by the war on drugs, by mass incarceration. Don't just have it as quote unquote money saved, but you've got to repair the harm that we've caused to so many communities, including unfortunately a lot of neighborhoods in Boston.
Outstanding. So that grant is in place. Is that piece? So that's passed. That's something not that we need to advocate for, but take advantage of.
Sort of in the budget, yeah. So it's a yearly program in the budget. It's $15 million. So it's on the governor's website, but I really wanted to lift it up. So it's on my website. It's senatoreldridge.com under press releases, and any group can apply. But again, it's September 15th is the deadline, so it's coming up. And my fear again is that a lot of truly community grassroots groups, especially those led by formerly incarcerated people or returning citizens, are not going to be aware of the program. So just want to, make sure that groups are aware of that. We reached out to, Housing for Justice,
Good.
New Reentry, New Beginnings Reentry, Stacey Borden,
yes,
Mac Hudson, Prisoners Legal Services. But, just want to make sure that, perhaps other groups, maybe smaller grassroots groups, are aware as well.
Outstanding. Again, thank you, Senator Eldridge, for your leadership. And thank you for your time here on Healing Our Land's broadcast on Boston Praise Radio and TV Network.
Thanks for having me on. Great to see you.
Likewise. And thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for being with us for another segment of Healing Our Land's broadcast. If God say the same, we'll be back on the other side of the top of the hour for yet another hour. And we broadcast Tuesday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., Sunday evening, 7 p.m. to 9.